The light is on, my friend, which means we're back. Another solo episode of the ZeroW podcast. Today I want to talk about pretty much the concept of like zooming out, the idea of developing wisdom over time or experience over time. Part of that comes with being able to see the bigger picture. When you're in something for the first time or when you're relatively inexperienced, you have a very narrow view of that particular thing, and that can deeply affect your experience of that thing. So an example of what I'm talking about is if you're relatively new as a lifter, when you fail a lift for the first time, that's important, a max out attempt or fail a lift at a competition that you really wanted to get, your first time failing a lift at a comp, it can hit you like a ton of bricks. It can feel quite dramatic. It can feel like the end of the world. And if you zoom out, if you have the experience, you can zoom out and realize, okay, well, this isn't the end of my journey. There are more competitions. I am going to get stronger. And it's all well and good for someone like me who's been in powerlifting for like 18 years to be able to sit here and say, you're going to keep lifting. It's all going to be fine. Until you experience that for yourself, it can be harder to believe. Most of the time, it's more like you hear the wisdom coming from experienced people, and then when you experience that yourself, you're like, oh, that's what they meant. It doesn't help so much to hear it, but I'm going to talk about it anyway because I think it's a really important subject. And it applies for kind of the broader target audience of ZeroW being both lifters and coaches and business owners in the context of these solo podcasts anyway. So the first big example is going to be that big example of lifting. And this can happen in so many different ways, shapes, and forms. But ultimately, it is about being able to ask yourself, is this my last competition? What does this competition actually mean to me in the grand scheme of my powerlifting career? Because often we get so hell-bent focused on that moment in time that we do lose sight of the bigger picture. And it's easy, especially if you're relatively inexperienced, and I would deem inexperienced in this case as like less than 5 years of competition, averaging 2 competitions a year. If you're less experienced than that, it can be harder to see the bigger picture because you don't have the evidence of it in front of you. And you have to ask yourself those sort of questions. Is this the end of the line for me? Is this the last competition? Or are there going to be other opportunities for me to work towards? Now, I don't think it's necessarily, and this might be getting a little bit too psychological, I don't necessarily think it's a bad thing to sit in that experience and feel the feelings. However, if you let it rule you, it just becomes deleterious. It just becomes a bad thing. It's going to rule your life. You need to be able to look at the bigger picture so you have some action items to work on to make sure that same mistake or that same experience doesn't happen again. I mean, that's the art of growing. It's like going through these experiences, learning from them, and then changing the behavior or changing the approach so that that same negative experience doesn't happen again. If anything, if it does happen again, building the mental fortitude to understand what has happened in that moment and be able to deal with it quickly in that moment. And that's very important, especially in our particular sport where there are 9 opportunities for failure. If there's only 1 opportunity for failure, if it's only win or loss, it can be a little bit easier to digest. The fact that you can set yourself up to have a terrible day on the platform because of missing an opener squat becomes a slightly higher risk. And so you have to be innately equipped with the ability to deal with those sort of failures in those moments. You have to be able to learn from them. You have to be able to grow with them. You have to some degree, be able to compartmentalize those experiences in the moment. And the more experience that you have, again, the more ability there is to zoom out. This is what I had this conversation with a lifter at the novice comp on the weekend. She was having a great day. She got all 3 squats and bench presses, and then she missed her 3rd deadlift attempt. So she had a fantastic day, and the 3rd deadlift attempt was a big number, and it was all great. And she was very upset by missing that 3rd deadlift attempt. And I made the point of saying that it's actually good to get that experience now because powerlifting has a relatively late inflection point. You tend to get quite good at it quite quickly, and you don't tend to deal with failure until later in the piece. Like if we put this side by side with Olympic weightlifting, for example, you fail all the time. Powerlifting, you should very rarely fail in the gym. And if you've got a conservative coach, which most coaches are with new time competitors, you tend not to fail that often in competition either. And so you might be competing for like 2 or 3 years where everything goes pretty smooth, and then you have a bad comp, like you bomb out or something like that. And it can hit you like a ton of bricks. And often at that inflection point, people exit the sport. People can get so disheartened by that bad experience that they leave the sport, which is why developing this ability to zoom out, to look at the bigger picture, to understand there's going to be another competition. I can learn from this. I can grow from this. It is such a vital skill to have. The same thing can be applied to coaching business, to being a PT or being a coach, having a gym. When you lose a client for the first time and you see that client go to a colleague or a competitor of yours, it can stab you in the heart. It can feel like absolute garbage, and it can be quite hard to deal with, especially if you have a scarcity mindset where you don't believe there's enough people to go around. You have to be good at dealing with that, because let me tell you, from 12 years, almost 13 years of owning a gym, that people leave. The crew changes. The tight-knit community changes and evolves over time. Your core clients that you look at and think, this person will never leave me, they leave eventually. Things change over time, especially if you are in this for the long run. People are going to change careers. They're going to move away. They're going to have injuries. They're going to want to move on and grow from another coach. Something is going to happen that leads people away from you. And if you don't know how to deal with that, you are absolutely doomed to fail. You have to be able to zoom out, look at the evidence, and be like, I've gotten clients, I've lost clients. That cycle is going to continue to happen. Don't just be resigned to that fact, but also analyze, why do I lose people? Why do they come to me? How can I lean into either of those things to create greater retention, to create greater uptake of my services, less people leaving? How can I learn from my mistakes? Am I asking the people that leave me, why have they left me, so I can be better as a coach, or I can be better as a gym owner? What can I do better? You have to keep coming back to you and what you can control, and you have to rely on the evidence that you have in front of you, which is your experience. If you don't get into this habit of self-assessment, of looking at the data as you go through these experiences, you don't get experience. You can say that you've got 10 years of experience running a gym, but there's a big difference between 10 years of experience being a coach or being a lifter and the same 1 year of experience repeated 10 times. You have to learn. You have to assess. You have to look deeply at what you're doing in order to grow. That is what true experience is. It's changing based on the perceived mistakes that you make over time. You have to be good at that. Otherwise, you're going to spin your wheels. To do that, you have to have a thick skin. You have to be able to take criticism, and you have to be able to deal criticism to yourself. You can't have empathy on yourself or sympathy on yourself. You need to have a hard look in the mirror and be like, what am I stuffing up? What am I doing wrong? What can I be doing better? That often involves having hard conversations and making hard decisions. If you're not willing to do that, you'll never have the best for yourself. And ultimately, that's what you want for yourself. You want the best for yourself in whatever way, shape, or form that looks like. And I can guarantee that if you're listening to this, you're probably not going to say the best for myself is the worst for myself. That's just not how it works. You want the best outcome for yourself. And in order to do that, you have to be willing to be critical of yourself, to self-analyze, to learn, and to grow. That's all I have to say. Hope that helps. Learn to zoom out. Hit me up for more information. Tell me what you want to hear on this podcast. Love doing it. I'll see you soon.